Hey, welcome back to Paramedic Project. Thanks for joining us once again. Expanding on themes around case preparation and actually the start of the case before we arrive on scene here and the roles of the people in the front of the ambulance. So last time we talked about the case preparation from when we received the case on the data terminal to when we arrive on scene, and the mental preparation that I like to do. Today, just want to talk a little bit more and condense that down and start talking about the last few seconds before we actually get to the patient and what that means for me. So we've been getting updates on information of our patient. Now we're actually to the point where we're close enough to the scene to start getting some actual real-time information, visual cues from the scene. Now, if we're at the scene of a road traffic accident, it's a really important time now when we're in the vicinity of the road traffic accident on approach to it in the last minute or so before we get out of the vehicle, when we can start looking for danger. So our primary survey and really our assessment of the scene starts right now. So it's important that we start looking for sources of danger, start looking for hazards before we get out of the ambulance. So that's one thing that I like to do in the last few seconds before I get out of the vehicle. Second thing it allows me to do is, if I can get close enough to the actual incident, it allows me to see the damage to the vehicles. That's a really important cue to take in about the patient's injuries. Whether it's a big significant mechanism, whether it's a head-on crash, whether the vehicle's been T-boned. That's going to give me some cues to as to what injuries the actual patient might be suffering as well. So that's a really good thing to take into account. The third thing I like to do is sometimes, depending on the state of the patient and where the patient is, we might actually be able to see the patient before we get out of here. So we can actually provide a overview of the scene to comms, to any other resource that are coming. We can tell them the actual dangers. We can tell them the specific location. And if we can see the patient, we can often even get an insight into the state of the patient before we even get there. Of course, we can't assess things by touching them from here, but we can often see whether they're walking around the scene, how they're positioned, whether they're positioned prone, and we can get a good idea of the mechanism of any injuries that might have happened in this actual case before we get out of the car. So it's a really important time, this last few seconds before we actually get to the patient, where we're starting to get some real-time information. It flicks us over from just preparing mentally to actually walking into the case. It's a good time to make sure we're safe, look at all our dangers, make sure we've got our PPE on before we actually approach the scene and start actually treating the patient. So that's been Paramedic Project. Thanks for joining us once again. Find us on social media, and we'll see you next time.